All right, hello everybody, and welcome to part 3 of this segment video breakdown. The topic of discussion today is going to be the French contrast method of training. Now, ultimately, what is the French contrast method of training? This is a form of training that utilizes 4 different movements, combination being plyometric exercises and resistance exercises at maximal to near maximal loads. This was formulated by a French track coach by the name of Gilles Comedy, and he started this method of training, but it has been used and implemented across many different sports, with things being basketball, football, baseball, etc. Now, when programming the French contrast method, there are 4 specific exercises that we need to utilize in order to reach the levels of potentiation. This is going to be a heavy resistance exercise at maximal or near maximal loads, being at 80 to 90% 1 rep max. Then that follows up by a plyometric exercise, which then leads into a resistance exercise that has a goal of trying to maximize power production. And finally, the last thing is going to be a plyometric exercise that's going to promote short ground contact time, so up and off the ground very quickly. Let's take a look at one of our 5 performance athletes going through the 4 different movements for a French contrast.
Right leg, other leg. Better.
To dive a little bit deeper, the French contrast method is going to work best to improve our body's ability to increase post-activation potentiation. Now, this is really great for us in terms of performance, because what we're doing is causing the body to generate more force or more contractile capability with lighter to moderate loads. Now, this is because when we do the heavy resistance load at 80 to 90% of our 1 rep max, we are increasing our body's level of incorporating high threshold motor units, improving our intermuscular and intramuscular coordination, and also decreasing our presynaptic inhibition. This is going to cause the nervous system to almost trick itself, because when we're going to the heavier load to the lighter load, it still has that high level of motor unit recruitment, so we're getting higher levels of force and power production when lifting the light to moderate loads. The top study I looked at focused on the potentiation effects that the French contrast method had on vertical jump ability. Now, what we can see from figure 1 was the comparison between a counter movement jump with a French contrast group and a baseline group. Ultimately, they had the French contrast group perform a counter movement jump post a French contrast set, and the baseline just performed a counter movement jump after doing their warm-ups. The neat thing is that you can see an improvement across all 3 different sets, and the French contrast group improved their counter movement jump significantly when comparing them to the control group themselves. Looking at figure 2, the comparison is different between the French contrast method and the other formulated method that looks to improve the same thing, which is the complex method. Still, the data showed the same thing based on the study, that the French contrast method improved counter movement jumps as compared to the complex method group. Ultimately, this is showing that the French contrast method takes into consideration a higher activation of post-activation potentiation, and possibly even better activation and utilization of the stretch shortening cycle based on the stored elastic energy going into the concentric activity, causing a better, higher levels of force production. So looking at a study that was conducted in 2019 that focused on the effects of the French contrast method on both maximum strength and vertical jumping performance. Based on what they found, they summarized that a French contrast method did show improvements in both maximal strength and vertical jump ability. Looking at table 2, focusing primarily around the 1 rep max squat and the 1 rep max trap bar deadlift, there is improvements in both the pre and post scores when utilizing the French contrast method. And looking down at table 3, there is improvements looking at squat jump and counter movement jump performance. So they measured things like jump height, peak power, peak force, and peak force allometrically scaled to their body mass, as well as peak velocity. Same things in terms of pre to post. Everything is improved when performing these movements right after the French contrast method set.
Okay, listeners, thank you very much for tuning in and listening to my video about the French contrast method. I hope you learned some important things on how the French contrast method is very beneficial for athletes in terms of improving our maximal strength and our vertical jump ability. Thank you very much, and see you in the next one.